Our first story, as I mentioned to you, it's going to take us up to one of the fastest growing suburban counties in America, and that is Denton County, Texas. That is northwest of Dallas, for those of you who are unfamiliar. Now, this was once a reliable Republican stronghold. Denton County has become increasingly, though, competitive in recent elections, and one local race could signal even more change. Michelle Butler is running for Justice of the Peace in Pct.6. Now, she could become the first Black woman elected to that seat. And her journey, you guys, from Zimbabwe to North Texas, from living undocumented to appearing on the ballot, reflects the evolving face of suburban politics. Michelle, good morning to you. And I just want to say welcome to the Tashara Parker Show.
2 days in a row. Good morning, sis.
We're so happy to have you. And I know we got a lot to get to here today. And I want to make sure that we are able to really maximize our time together. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is you've described your journey as from undocumented to documented on the ballot. How did that chapter of your life shape the way that you see the justice system today?
Yes, that is one of the main reasons why I entered into political organizing, was sort of kind of to be my own advocate. I was one of the kids that was like a dreamer, and my parents moved here, seeking a better future for us. We were fleeing an authoritarian regime where we were coming from Zimbabwe. And so we ended up here, and largely for a long time in my life, I didn't know that I was during my childhood that I was undocumented. I went to school just like everyone else. And then eventually, after graduating high school, top 3 of my class and trying to go to college is when I realized, wow, I don't have any options because I'm undocumented. And there was all of this potential of the type of person that I could be in our society. And yet I wasn't given the opportunity. And so that journey shaped a lot of who I am, because one, living in the shadows means you go out of your way to avoid the justice system at all costs. And then having to navigate it from being undocumented to sort of trying to find a pathway to citizenship means a lot of paperwork, a lot of processes, and it was a very complicated process. And so it shaped the way that I look at these systems and how people end up in the legal system trying to navigate it, and how difficult it is if you're one without any means or poor. And I really wanted to make those systems more accessible and less intimidating for people.
And so I want to jump in from there for viewers who may not fully understand, what exactly does a justice of the peace do? Break that down for us.
Yes. So the justice of the peace role deals with the very first entrance into the justice system. They deal with things like landlord and tenant disputes, which are evictions. They deal with Class C misdemeanors. We don't send anybody to jail, but we do set bail. And we also deal with truancy. We deal with marriages in the court. And we also deal with small claims that are under $20,000.
Why should someone in Carrollton, Lewisville, the colony, care deeply about this race?
Yeah, you should definitely care deeply about this race, because the person that sits on this bench has a lot of jurisdiction in how we deal with cases. And sis, I'm not gonna lie to you, we are going through tough times. Most of us here in Denton County, we are middle-class families, and most times people are almost maybe a paycheck or a couple of savings away from ending up in JP court. And this pertains to whether you're a renter or you have a mortgage. If you're a renter, you'll probably end up in JP court if you can't make your rent. And if you have a mortgage and you miss 3 months on your mortgage and your company can't give you a modification and they want to send you to short sale or foreclose on your home, you end up in JP court. And so the imbalance happens in the sense that most of the people who come into our courts in the JP courts are what we call pro se, which is self-representing. And this makes a lot of sense, because if you can't pay your credit card, you can't pay your mortgage, and you can't pay your rent, you probably can't afford an attorney. And it is the inverse on the other side, because they probably can afford attorneys. So what happens then is that there is an imbalance on how people are able to be represented and the fair shot that they get to sort of mediating these issues. So I tell people that this is not like an issue that is far away from them. This is something that touches their daily lives. And even if you don't live in Denton County, you might get a traffic ticket in Denton County, or anything can happen.
Well, don't say that, because a lot of us drive through Denton County.
We need to be careful when you drive through here, okay? But so these courts are very important as it pertains to how people see justice, because it is almost always the first touch that people have with the justice system.
I want to ask you this, and you kind of touched on it a little bit. So, if you can briefly respond to this one. You said most people won't see a quote big courtroom, but they will experience JP court. How can a small moment in JP court turn into something that's life altering?
Oh, yes. And I love when people ask this question.
Yeah.
And it ties back to why I'm running for this seat, because what I want to do is reduce people escalating further into the justice system. So, for example, if you come in and you have an eviction, our goal is to try to mediate to keep you in your home so you're not further propelled, one, into the justice system, but two, into homelessness, right?
Mhm.
And also to reduce the amount of evictions that happen in the court. When you get evicted, you end up having what we call bed rental history. And that bed rental history sits with you for 7 years and keeps you in a cycle where you end up having to have a difficult time finding a place to live.
Yes.
A lot of people who've gone to go rent, you need to make 3 times the rent, and they do the background check and the check to make sure you don't have any evictions. Those evictions that they're looking for are those cases that happen in JP court.
Yep.
Same thing with things like credit cards. I tell people all the time, we all have made bad financial decisions. I know I have at one point in time. My first credit card had something outrageous, like a 30% APR. I was just so happy.
Talk to the
I
people.
was like, oh, I got a credit card. But what I didn't realize was that eventually I was tied into a system that made sure that I wasn't going to be able to pay that credit card off. And that debt goes to JP court, where the creditor sues you. And so one of the things that we want to do in order to allow young people to thrive, because this affects young people, is to mediate those debts so that maybe people can get on a payment plan and essentially not end up having 7 years of credit markers on their credit. And
I just want to jump in because I love that you mentioned that, because as someone who attended a pretty large university in the state of Texas, on our campus, I'll never forget, and this affected me for a long time. I'll never forget on our campus, all the credit card companies, I won't say all, there's this one. And if you know that one, there's this one credit card company that is on a lot of campuses. And without me saying the name, a lot of people will guess which credit card company it is. They show up on these college campuses and they give you these credit cards. You don't know what to do with them most of the times. And so oftentimes you're, reaching your limit, et cetera. And you do have to deal with that. Now, I never had to go to court for it, but it took me a long time to pay that stuff off because of how high the interest rates were at the time. I want to jump into my next question. You spent many years organizing for families, housing, wages, et cetera. How did you decide that the courtroom not organizing was your next lane, and why was that?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this on our show yesterday. I'm glad I get to expound upon it. For a large portion of the last 17 years, I was doing movement building and working to advance policies that work for working families. But this started happening for me when I was the state director at Run for Something. I was responsible for recruiting, training, and running progressive candidates across our state. And one of the things I started noticing while doing this work is that people always go for the sexy races, right? They want to run for Congress, they want to run for state house, but very rarely do people think about, running for the JP courts or running for the courts. And that's when I started looking at places like Nueces County, where they started dissolving some JP seats and essentially moving those people in the district and merging them with other JP districts and further exploding the dockets. And not only that, Republicans have done an excellent and impeccable job of filling these seats in places where people don't run. We've got 254 counties, and we've got some places where JPs are simply appointed because Democrats won't run or progressive candidates won't run. And so I'm looking at my own seat where the Republican here won by 356 votes, and looking at the dynamics of the district and the values of the district. And I was looking at the court and seeing that the judge does not exemplify the values of the district. And I was like, this is going to be the first court that I'm going to run for, to give the people of my community representation. And not only that, the ask came from people in my community. I have a dental hygienist who I go to, who is a very hardworking woman, but on a separate portion of her life, she's also the main caregiver for her mom. So when
Yeah.
her mom was sick and in the hospital, she missed a couple of hours to make the paycheck for her rent. And she ended up in this court. And I remember talking to her, and I was like, nobody should know a judge this intimately. And she was like, yeah, I know her, because when I stood in front of her, I had already lost before I even walked in. And it was almost as if she didn't even see me as a person. And those stories are gut wrenching to me, because
Yeah.
these are the people who end up in this courts. And if you have judges like the incumbent who take money attuned to $50,000 from developers who are evicting people in this court, you have a conflict of interest as it pertains to how you're going to serve people equitably.
Is that something that's publicly reported that you just mentioned?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay. How can a justice of the peace actually connect people to resources without overstepping those judicial boundaries?
Yes. So this is one of the things that I hope to do in my court. We have resources, places like MetroCrest that help people, and it's about building relationships and making sure that people are connected to resources for paying things like rent and utilities. But more so, outside of that, because we deal with pro se litigants, I think the main thing is connecting people to legal aid. And this is what I've done in a large portion of my life, is that I've connected people to legal aid, especially people who want to naturalize for citizenship. I don't know if most people are familiar with how difficult it is to naturalize and become a citizen. I'll often tell people that it's not that people don't want to. The pathway is rigid. And not
Absolutely.
only that, it is expensive.
And it's getting worse.
It is getting worse, and it is to thousands and thousands of dollars. And so when you connect people to legal aid, they better understand their rights, and they have representatives who are able to give them like sort of like the layout of what it is that they're facing as it pertains to that case. So I think as a sitting judge and a person who is going to be on this bench, it is going to be really important to be able to sort of guide people through legal resources so they have an understanding of what cases are sitting in front of them, because the court can be very intimidating.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why default judgments happen in court is, one, people are being asked to come to court between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. So that means you have to miss out on a check to end up in court. And these are working people. And we want to reduce those default judgments. We want people to come to court, and we want this court to be less intimidating, because showing up is half the battle.
I'm trying to tell you, because you walk in sometimes and you looking at the judge looking at you, you like, oh Lord, what I done walked into. I want to ask you this. You're running right now against Sophia Anwar in the primary, and both of you have some significant endorsements. For voters trying to decide between two qualified candidates, what's the clearest contrast between the both of you?
Yeah, so the clearest contrast that I like to tell people is that I have lived in this district for 22 years. These are people whose families have grown alongside mine. These are my neighbors. I know the needs of this district. I cut my teeth organizing in it, and eventually went to go organize across the country to go advance those policies that affect families in my district, to go work for people like Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and to be in movement spaces where I'm advancing candidates who are coming out of this district to run to turn our district blue. But not only that, I have been able to be a strong fundraising candidate, one that can go toe-to-toe with the incumbent. And also,
Hold on, I want to ask you about that, specifically about the incumbent. Okay, you could face Blanca Oliver in the general election. What is your path to victory in that situation?
I love that you asked me this question. So our path to victory is that, one, this campaign is being run by professionals, and we're also the people who do campaigns for a living. And that is the advantage that we have, is that we are people who run school board campaigns, people who run presidential campaigns across the country. And that is something that we have, is sort of that organizing arm. And not only that, we have a lot of fundraising power, and we're running a very, strong progressive race. We're not doing any sort of like milquetoast campaigning. We're going to be strong in our values. And I think that's going to be attractive to voters.
Hold on real quick. For folks who may not be familiar, by the way, let me give a shout out to the folks in the comments. I think it says I can't read what all that quote says, the attached something. She has the right attitude and the proper research, because there are appointed justice only because there was no opponent. But JPs also have all the state's rights of civil and criminal judges. NI aunties, but it is a complex process to report or expose corrupt JPs. Thank y'all so much for weighing in. Kim, I see your comments as well. Continue to weigh in, comment, let us know if you have a question for Michelle. That's what I really want to see. I would love to have her answering some of your questions. Of course, I've prepared my own, but would love to have some of your questions answered as well. Another comment that we have here, so many people are tied to the madnesses that people don't understand what is going on. Yeah, it's a lot going on. And I appreciate you guys tapping into conversations like this to ensure that we can continue to have those conversations openly. What is this? Jason says, at Texas Tech and while I was at Ohio State, credit card companies set up tables and set up tables on the yard and became predators. Yeah, I am telling you, these credit card companies were certainly at the university I attended in Texas. I'll just leave it alone. You mentioned already, Michelle, you've worked on some national campaigns, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and served as Texas State Director for Run for Something, which you talked about yesterday and today. How does running campaigns prepare you to run a courtroom? And I heard you mention milquetoast campaign. We ain't doing that over here. For folks who may not be familiar with that terminology, what does that mean?
Okay, so I'll start off with the milquetoast thing. We're not doing middle of the line, boring paper, name on a ballot, hot body on a ballot. We are going to go out there and we're going to fight. And that's what it takes. I think people are looking for people who are going to fight for them. They don't want people who use sort of like these seats as political springboards for their own personal careers. I tell people all the time, is that like my day job pays me more than this job would do. So this is not about any sort of like monetary, reward or any sort of like accolades that I'm seeking. I really, truly do believe that we have to start holding the line on these benches and that we cannot simply let Republicans come in and snatch up all of these seats. Secondly, you asked me a very important question about transferable skills of the work that I've done in the past and how that's transferable to this. One of the things that we do on campaigns is we manage budgets. I was responsible for managing about 15 to 20 House races when I was at Emily's List under their independent expenditure arm, which is the super PAC side. And this was at a time where everybody got redistricted and we were trying to keep all of our pro-choice women in the House. That meant I had $1 million budget. Not only did I have $1 million budget, I had to figure out how to allocate all of those funds and how to properly use that money to disperse it amongst candidates to make sure that they're met in the moment where we're able to use these funds to get them elected. So if that meant that we were going to run mail or ads in those districts, it was about the discernment of where efforts go in order for our people to get elected. But more importantly, when you're talking about running a courtroom, right, it's not about just the docket or the cases on the docket. You're talking courtroom staff. You're talking training for staff. You're talking how people, sort of like navigate the court, customer service in the court. And so those skills, I think, are transferable for me because I know how to run a docket, to clear a docket, to make sure that people are coming into the court and the staff is trained. It's not intimidating. We have the best resources and people really do truly feel like the court is sort of a community court.
So Michelle, I do want to ask you this because I don't want to run out of time. I want to make sure I get this question in. If somebody is watching, and I've heard a lot about folks that are voting at the top, the ballot is long. Okay. I voted yesterday. The ballot is long. Okay. Across a lot of parts of Texas. Okay. You get all the way down. You got your proposition. You think you're done. Then the propositions pop up. It's a lot going on. So for someone who is, a lot of people are worried about one big race. We know what race that is. I need those big races to encourage you to vote all the way down the ballot. So if someone is watching, has never voted in a justice of the peace race before, why should they start now?
Okay. I want to tie this into what I'm going to say private 810 said.
Yeah.
There was just something very important. They said JP's has also the state's rights of civil and criminal judges. Yes. I'm going to tell you something that is a very dark fact. Okay. These courts were instituted sort of to mediate issues, but JP courts always either are responsible for giving justice or ushering in injustice. So during the civil rights era, JP courts, one, were the courts that were responsible, one, for arresting people for interracial marriage. These were the courts that were responsible for arresting civil rights leaders and putting them into court. Any sort of like poll tax things, this was JP court. But more importantly, what people do not know is that in certain jurisdictions where counties that do not have medical examiners, JPs act as coroners. And that has a very dark history because during the Jim Crow South, those courts were the same courts that were able to basically say that lynchings were not lynching. So you would take that and have a judge who was part of the Jim Crow era and basically say that lynching was an accidental death or an accidental hanging. So what I want to warn people is that the time that we're living in right now, we're not that very far from having people on the bench that are going to use the law not in the favor of the citizens. This pertains to your daily rights and how justice is rendered by whom the person is on that bench. That person has to exemplify good values, and we have to not go back into the Jim Crow South where people are trying to take us back. This court matters because we are the first instance of justice that people get. And I want you to think about that. I want you to think about your freedoms. And I want you to think about people who have fought for you to be able to step into these courts and speak for yourself and be seen as a human being and given the justice that you deserve. So I implore you, as you're voting at the top of the ticket, to think about issues that hit you most at home. Yes, the Senate race is great. Yes, the congressional races are great, but you live here at home. I want you to vote down ballot. I want you to vote for people who are going to make the laws that immediately touch you and also render judgments for things like evictions and truancy and, small claims. So these races are very important. Please vote down ballot. Go and do your research your candidates, and fill out your ballot before you go in. You can go and look at your county elections department.
We were telling folks yesterday to make sure that they go in and get a sample ballot, or they can print it at home, or just, you can even write it down. Honestly, if you wanted to, you don't have a printer. Folks may not have access to printers anymore. I feel like that's ancient now, even though I got my printer right back here on my desk. But, folks may not have printers, but just write it down and take that with you. You can take paper inside of the ballot booth. In one sentence, Michelle, one sentence now. I know you've been on these campaigns a long time. One sentence. All right. Wrap this up. What kind of court are you building?
I am building a court that is accessible for working families. I do not want to punish people for being poor. I want people to be seen. I want to treat people with dignity. And more importantly, this is a court that stops the cycle of poverty. We want families to thrive.
Michelle, you have educated our audience, and I feel like I have a lot of very educated folks that follow this page and follow the work that we do. And for the most part, they're tapped in. I just appreciate all the insight that you brought in, not only today, but even yesterday when you stopped in briefly when we had so many of the candidates on. So again, thank you, Michelle. Good luck to you. Hopefully you make some history up in Denton County. Appreciate you stepping in on the Tashara Parker Show channel. Have a great rest of your day.
Same to you. Thank you for this platform.
Yes, of course. Of course. Okay, folks, I told you we had a lot to talk about today, and I'm so happy that we were able to get Michelle back on the show here. You guys know we cover news and politics all across Texas. This is not a political show. I always try to remind y'all of that. It is not a political show, but again, we know how to meet the moment, and I think right now this moment calls for ensuring that we are talking about the things that are happening. And I love how eloquently Michelle delivered the information about knowing the process and knowing why you should continue to vote down ballot. For those of you who did vote yesterday, I know some of you were shocked when you were put in separate lines. I would love to hear from you. Let me know how voting went for you yesterday. If you did go ahead and get your early vote on, we've been trying to tell you, make sure you vote early, because on election day, okay, you're going to have to vote in your precinct. That is something that a lot of you may not be familiar with, especially if you're in parts of Dallas County. So just keep that in mind.